The stale scent of antiseptic and desperation clung to me like a second skin, a constant companion in the fluorescent-lit purgatory of the emergency room. My name is Alara, and at 28, I was already intimately familiar with the taste of exhaustion and the hollow ache of a bank account drained by medical bills. My son, Leo, was 8, and his fragile lungs dictated the rhythm of my life, each wheezing breath a reminder of the relentless fight. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple, the hospital becoming more home than my cramped, perpetually cold apartment. Tonight was one of those nights, the kind where the clock seemed to mock my fatigue, its hands barely crawling. A new text message buzzed, its vibration a tiny tremor of dread in my pocket. It was from the landlord. Rent due. Final notice. My heart gave a familiar lurch, a cold, sickening flip. Leo's nebulizer treatments were costing a fortune, the specialist appointments a luxury I couldn't afford but couldn't refuse. I had nothing left. Absolutely nothing. Despair was a heavy cloak, suffocating me, blurring the edges of the bustling ER. I needed money desperately. A crazy idea, born of pure panic, began to form in the corners of my mind. I knew a guy, a low-level dealer who sometimes frequented the ER for minor scrapes. He'd once mentioned opportunities for quick cash, no questions asked. I'd always scoffed, but now I wasn't scoffing. I was contemplating. My fingers hovered over my phone, the screen a gateway to a world I swore I'd never touch. Just as I was about to type, the automatic doors hissed open, admitting a gust of cold night air and a figure that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. He wasn't loud or flashy, but his presence was a physical force. He moved with a predatory grace, his dark suit impeccable despite the crimson stain blossoming on his left shoulder. His face was a chiseled mask, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were the color of storm clouds, intense and unsettling. He was wounded, clearly, but there was no tremor in his stance, no flicker of pain in those unnerving eyes. He wasn't like the usual street brawlers or accident victims. This man exuded an aura of quiet, deadly power. He was an apex predator who had, for some unknown reason, found himself briefly outmatched. His gaze swept over the chaotic waiting room, dismissing the other patients, the harried nurses, until it landed on me. It was a possessive stare, as if he'd chosen me, and the choice was final. A shiver, not entirely of fear, traced its way down my spine. "Nurse," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly smooth for such a formidable man. "I need attention." It wasn't a request. It was a command. My training kicked in, overriding the primal alarm bells screaming in my head. He was a patient, injured, and I was a nurse. "Right this way, sir," I managed, my voice a little breathless. I led him to an empty bay, the stark white curtains offering a semblance of privacy. As he sat on the exam table, the rich scent of expensive cologne, faint blood, and something else, something dark and earthy, like old leather and danger, filled the small space. Up close, his eyes were even more captivating, flecked with gold, holding a depth that hinted at untold stories. "What happened?" I asked, my fingers deftly peeling back the fabric of his suit jacket. The fabric was exquisitely tailored, a testament to wealth I couldn't even fathom. Underneath, a deep gash bled steadily, a clean cut, almost surgical in its precision, but clearly from a blade. It was too deep for a simple bandage. "You'll need stitches," I stated, my professional tone betraying none of the internal turmoil. He watched me, his gaze unwavering, as I cleaned the wound. His skin was warm beneath my gloved touch, surprisingly smooth and unmarred, save for the injury. He didn't flinch, didn't wince, even as I probed the edges of the cut. "Just fix it," he said, his voice tight, a subtle strain now evident. He was pushing through the pain, clearly used to it. "I'll need to numb it," I said, reaching for the lidocaine. "It'll sting." He gave a curt nod. As I injected the anesthetic, he finally broke eye contact, his jaw clenching. I worked quickly, my hands practiced and precise, closing the wound with neat, even stitches. The silence in the bay was thick, punctuated only by the soft snip of my scissors and the rustle of sterile gauze. I was acutely aware of his eyes on me again, tracking my every movement, a silent assessment. "Alara," he murmured, the sound of my name on his lips sending another jolt through me. He must have seen my name tag. "You're good." "It's my job," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, my focus on the knotting of the thread. When I finished, applying a sterile dressing, he slowly rose. His movement was fluid, powerful, even with the fresh stitches. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, far more than my emergency room fee would ever be. He placed it on the counter. "Keep the change," he said, his storm cloud eyes holding mine. There was a flicker there, a brief, almost imperceptible softening, before it was gone. "I'll be in touch." And then he was gone, a phantom in the night, leaving behind only the lingering scent of danger and the unsettling feeling that I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. The money he left was enough to cover Leo's treatments for months, enough to pay the rent and buy us some breathing room. It was a lifeline, but it felt like a poisoned gift. I looked at the stack of bills, my hands trembling slightly. I hadn't asked for it. He had simply left it. The implication hung heavy in the air. He expected something in return. The next morning, the world seemed to hold its breath. I woke to the insistent, frantic knocking on my apartment door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a premonition of dread tightening its icy grip. It wasn't the landlord. It wasn't the mailman. It was a heavy, rhythmic pounding that vibrated through the cheap wood. I peered through the peephole and my blood ran cold. Two hulking men in dark suits stood on my landing, their faces grim, their shoulders impossibly broad. Beyond them, in the hallway, I could see more. A seemingly endless line of them, spilling down the stairs, their presence radiating an undeniable, chilling authority. 200 men, I would later learn, though at the moment, it felt like an army. They were everywhere. My small, safe world had been breached. I opened the door, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped the knob. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice a thin, reedy whisper. One of the men, older, with kind eyes that belied his formidable stature, stepped forward. He had a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a testament to a life lived on the edge. "Alara," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his appearance. "My employer requests your presence. He is unwell." "Unwell?" I repeated, my mind racing. "The stitches? An infection? Or was this something else entirely? A trap?" "I can't just leave," I protested, glancing back at Leo, who was still asleep in his small bed, oblivious to the storm gathering outside our door. "He insists," the man said, his tone firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "Your son will be cared for. Anything he needs, he will have. You will be safe. You will be compensated." My breath hitched. They knew about Leo. They had investigated me. The realization was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. They weren't here to hurt us. They were here for me. "What about my job?" The man gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "That has been handled. You are on extended leave." It was clear then. This wasn't a request. It was an unrefusable summons. My old life, my struggling, desperate life, was over. I was being pulled into his world, whether I liked it or not. I packed a small bag, my hands still trembling, and kissed Leo's forehead, a silent promise that I would return. As I stepped out of my apartment, flanked by two of the silent men, the hallway teeming with their intimidating presence, I felt a strange mix of fear and a perverse sense of relief. The decision had been made for me. I was blindfolded for the journey, the thick silk effectively cutting off my sight, amplifying my other senses. The rumble of a powerful engine beneath me, the scent of expensive leather, the muted murmur of conversation I couldn't quite decipher. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening, where I was going, what awaited me. My heart thumped a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a bird trapped in a cage. When the vehicle finally stopped and the blindfold was gently removed, I blinked, disoriented by the sudden flood of light. I was in an opulent, sprawling mansion, a place of impossible luxury. High ceilings, polished marble floors, antique furniture, and original artwork adorned every surface. The air smelled of beeswax, old money, and something subtly floral, a stark contrast to the antiseptic tang of the ER or the stale air of my apartment. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and terrifying. The older man, the one who had come to my door, led me through a labyrinth of hallways, his footsteps silent on the thick Persian rugs. "My name is Anton," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "My employer is demanding. But he trusts you." Trust. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I had stitched a wound. Was that enough to earn the trust of a man who commanded an army? Anton led me to a bedroom, a vast space dominated by a king-sized bed draped in rich fabrics. The man from the ER, my patient, lay propped against pillows, his face pale, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. His eyes, those intense storm cloud eyes, were closed. He looked vulnerable, a stark contrast to the formidable man I had encountered just hours before. The wound I had stitched on his shoulder was inflamed, an angry red line. He was clearly feverish. "He developed an infection," Anton explained, his voice hushed. "The doctor we called, he was incompetent. He only made it worse. My employer asked for you." A wave of professional indignation warred with my fear. An incompetent doctor? These people had endless resources. Why me? But then I looked at the man, truly looked at him, and saw the subtle tremor in his hand, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was in pain, truly ill. And for some reason, he had chosen me. "I need a full medical kit," I told Anton, my nursing instincts kicking in, pushing aside the fear. "Antibiotics, pain medication, sterile dressings. And I need a clear space to work." Anton nodded, a flicker of relief in his kind eyes. "Anything you need, Alara. Anything at all." For the next few days, the mansion became my ward and he my sole patient. I administered antibiotics, changed dressings, monitored his fever, and coaxed him to eat. He was a difficult patient, impatient, and prone to terse commands, even in his weakened state. But there were moments, fleeting glimpses, where the mask slipped. One afternoon, as I was changing his dressing, he winced, a rare display of pain. "It hurts," he admitted, his voice rough. "I know," I said softly, my fingers gentle as I cleaned the wound. "You'll be all right. Just let the medication do its work." He watched me, his gaze intense, assessing. "You're not afraid," he stated, not a question. "I'm a nurse," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I've seen worse. And I have a job to do." A faint smile, barely a twitch of his lips, touched his mouth. "Most people are afraid of me." "You're just a man with a bad infection right now," I countered, a hint of defiance in my voice. "And you need my help." He was silent for a long moment, his storm cloud eyes searching mine. "My name is Roman," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "Roman Volkov." Roman. The name suited him, ancient and powerful. I nodded, a silent acknowledgement. In those days of forced proximity, of tending to his wounds, something shifted between us. He was still the dangerous man, the crime boss, but he was also a man vulnerable, dependent on my care. I saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the subtle clench of his jaw when pain lanced through him. I saw the quiet intelligence in his gaze, the sharp, calculating mind that never truly rested. And, in turn, he saw me, not just as a nurse, but as Alara, the woman who wasn't afraid, the woman who treated him with professional competence and a surprising lack of subservience. His fever finally broke, the angry redness receding from his wound. As he slowly regained his strength, the opulent room began to feel less like a prison and more like a strange, shared space. He began to talk, not about his business, but about his past in clipped, fragmented sentences. He spoke of a childhood marked by loss, of a family torn apart by rival factions, of a life forged in violence, and the relentless pursuit of power to protect what little he had left. His ruthlessness, I began to understand, was born of survival, a shield against a world that had shown him little mercy. One evening, as I was preparing to leave his room, he stopped me. "Alara," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Anton has been thorough. He told me about your son, Leo. His condition. Your struggles. My blood ran cold. He had investigated me. Every detail of my desperate life laid bare before him. It was a violation, yet also a strange comfort. He knew. He truly knew the extent of my desperation. I had to, he said, as if reading my thoughts. I needed to know who I was trusting. And I needed to know what you needed, he paused, his gaze intense. Your ex-husband, a gambler, deep in debt to a rival. He told them about you. About Leo. My breath caught in my throat. My ex, Mark, had been a ghost in our lives for years, a shadow of a man consumed by his addiction. The idea that he had endangered Leo, that his recklessness had drawn me into this terrifying world, filled me with a cold, impotent rage. They were looking for leverage, Roman continued, his voice hardening. To get to me. They thought you were a weakness. He rose from the bed, moving with a strength that had returned, though still a little stiff. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance. They were wrong. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned, his storm cloud eyes holding mine. You are not a weakness, Alara. You are a strength. They underestimated you. And they underestimated me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just a nurse tending to a powerful man. I was a pawn, unwittingly caught in a dangerous game, my son a potential target. The gilded cage suddenly felt far more like a prison. The next few days were a blur of hushed conversations between Roman and Anton, of maps spread across a massive mahogany table, of men coming and going with grim faces. I understood little of the specifics, but the tension in the air was palpable, thick with impending conflict. Roman was preparing for something, a confrontation, a reckoning. And I, somehow, was at the center of it. One morning, Roman found me in the mansion's vast library, pretending to read, but truly just trying to make sense of my new reality. Alara, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. He held a small, burner phone in his hand. I need you to make a call. My stomach dropped. Who? Your ex-husband, he said, his gaze unwavering. Mark. My hands trembled as I took the phone. The thought of speaking to Mark, of being forced to engage with the man who had brought this danger to my doorstep, filled me with a sickening dread. But I knew instinctively that I had no choice. What do I say? Tell him you're in trouble, Roman instructed, his voice low and calm. Tell him you need his help. That you're scared. That you're alone. Appeal to his paternal instincts, if he has any left. Tell him you're at your old apartment, and you're waiting for him. It was a trap. A lure. And I was the bait. My heart hammered against my ribs, but a strange resolve settled over me. For Leo, I would do anything. I dialed the number, my fingers clumsy. Mark's voice, slurred and unfamiliar, answered on the third ring. I followed Roman's instructions, my voice laced with a fear that wasn't entirely feigned. I spoke of vague threats, of needing his protection, of being alone and vulnerable. I poured all my desperation, all my terror for Leo, into my words. Mark, surprisingly, agreed to come. Perhaps it was a flicker of residual guilt, or perhaps he was simply too muddled to question it. Roman watched me throughout the call, his expression unreadable. When I hung up, he simply nodded. Good, he said. Now we wait. The waiting was agonizing. I sat in the library, the grand room feeling suffocating, the silence punctuated by the distant sound of Roman's men moving through the house, preparing. I knew what was coming. A confrontation. Violence. And I had played my part. Hours later, Anton found me, his face grim but relieved. It is done, he said, his voice quiet. The threat has been neutralized. Roman returned to the mansion later that night, his suit rumpled, a faint bruise blooming on his cheekbone, but his eyes held a cold, triumphant glint. He was exhausted, but victorious. He walked directly to me, his gaze sweeping over me, as if to assure himself I was unharmed. Mark, I asked, my voice barely audible. He's no longer a problem, Roman said, his voice devoid of emotion. Neither are the others. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. I knew enough. The world I had stumbled into was brutal, unforgiving. But it was also a world where threats were dealt with decisively. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Roman found me in the breakfast room, a vast space bathed in the morning light. He sat opposite me, a plate of untouched food before him. "Elara," he began, his voice low, serious. "The threat is gone. You and Leo are safe. You are free to go back to your life." He paused, his storm cloud eyes searching mine. "Your debts are paid. Your apartment is secure. You will have a substantial sum in your account, enough to ensure Leo's care for years to come. You will never have to worry about money again." The words were a lifeline, an escape route back to the life I had known, a life free from the suffocating grip of financial worry. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, everything I had fought for. But as I looked at Roman, at the man who had pulled me into his dangerous world, who had shown me glimpses of vulnerability beneath his formidable exterior, a strange ache settled in my chest. "Or," he continued, his voice even lower now, "you could stay." My breath hitched. "Stay? In this world of opulence and danger with this man. I need you, Elara," he said, his gaze unwavering, intense. "Not just for your skills as a nurse. For your strength. Your defiance. Your compassion. I need someone who sees me, truly sees me, beyond the titles and the threats. Someone who isn't afraid." He leaned forward, his voice a raw whisper. "I need you by my side." I looked around the grand room, at the life he was offering. It was a life of unimaginable luxury, but also a life of constant peril. It was a choice between the familiar, albeit difficult, safety of my old world and the exhilarating, terrifying uncertainty of his. My mind reeled, weighing the options. My old life was one of constant struggle, of fear for Leo's health, of the relentless pursuit of enough. It was a life where I was a victim of circumstance, constantly reacting, constantly fighting to stay afloat. Roman was offering me a different kind of fight, a different kind of danger, but also a different kind of security, a different kind of purpose. He saw my competence, my resilience, not as mere survival instincts, but as strengths. He saw me. And then there was Roman himself. The powerful, ruthless man who had shown me unexpected gentleness, who had trusted me with his life, who had protected my son. The connection between us, forged in the crucible of his illness and the shared danger, was undeniable, a powerful, magnetic pull. I thought of Leo, of his bright, curious eyes, of his fragile lungs. With Roman, Leo would have the best care, the best life, free from the shadow of financial strain. But he would also be in a world touched by darkness. My gaze met Roman's. His storm cloud eyes held a glimmer of hope, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. He wasn't just offering me a choice, he was asking me for something, truly asking. "I'll stay," I said, the words surprising even myself, but feeling undeniably right. A sense of peace settled over me, a quiet certainty. It wasn't a decision born of fear, but of a conscious choice, a leap of faith into the unknown. I would embrace this dangerous, compelling future, not as a victim, but as an active participant. My old life was gone, replaced by a fierce new purpose. I reached across the table and took his hand, my fingers intertwining with his strong, calloused ones. It was a silent promise, a forging of a new path. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of hope, a sense of belonging. I had found my home, not in a place, but with a man, and in the dangerous, beautiful world he commanded.